So this is really where we're coming to the end of looking at the current system in the system's life cycle, and then you're going to designing the new system. The most important part for you guys is to look at analysis in the notes that you're given, the specification notes that I tell you to look at all the time, and there at the heading at the top it says describe what is involved when analysing diddle-diddle-da and all that. That bit there tells you exactly what you need to know for this particular course. So when you're considering answering the question of what is analysis, I think this little diagram represents it quite well. You're looking at what are the requirements of the system, that's a question, and that's going to involve you doing some data analysis and basically coming up with an understanding of the system, and that's quite a holistic view of things. It's quite widespread, it depends on the system and all that kind of thing, but that really is what goes on in the middle. And then you end up with this requirement specification, and as I said already, this is the end of analysis where you can go on to design. So you need that requirement specification to be able to go on to design. So when you're looking at the question of what does analysis involve, it is really going to be quite dependent on the system, and there are many different elements to analysis dependent on a particular system, and there are many different approaches as well. You're really going to have to look at only two different diagrams here when there are actually many more. But if you look on the left hand side, that's really a good breakdown of exactly the sort of things that need to be decided, calculated, and it really is decisions that have to be made in order to go into the requirement specification that we talked about. And obviously calculations have to be made because things have to fit. There's no good putting together a requirement specification and ultimately designing something when something's not going to fit. It's not going to be able to fit all the data that needs to be saved, or whatever specifications you're going to get into and particular parameters you're going to look at. But the representing of the system with diagrams, that's something you really have to get your head around, and it's about practice, and we're going to look at them next. So for data flow diagrams, this gives a little overview of what they are. You really need to practice being able to look at them, reading them and understanding what they're actually saying to you, but also constructing them as well, both in terms of theory but especially in terms of when you come to do your projects, because it's vitally important that you can represent how data flows through the system, which is given in the title there. These are commonly known as DFDs. So I'll give you a little summary of what they are there. The syllabus course text goes into a little bit more detail about what they are, and both of them are valuable to look at and read and really learn. But the core thing is this diagram here. That's not a data flow diagram, don't get confused with that, but that's the core principle, and in fact that's the core principle of the whole of IT and computing. There is nothing that goes on in IT or computing that you cannot relate to IPO, input process output. So you've got to drum that into your head, and you've really got to get to grips with what is input, what is processing, and what is output at the end. So what things go in, what happens in the middle, and what comes out the other side. And this happens a number of times in the system. So in a data flow diagram, this is going to go on. So as I've already said, there's many different types of diagrams, but the other diagram that you have to get used to for this spec and learn for this spec are system flowcharts. System flowcharts are explained briefly there, and they're also again given in the notes for the syllabus course text, and again they're both worth reading and both worth learning. But again, I've repeated the input process output diagram because they must follow that principle. IPO, input process output. You can tell by me repeating this that this is core, this is essential learning, and it's essential learning for both this diagram, the other diagram, and all diagrams and everything you're talking about, and you must be able to recognize these particular elements. So system flowcharts is really the breaking down of how things happen, how things flow throughout the system. And yes, there are elements of data flow that are going to happen within the system flowcharts, but they are two different diagrams, and you have to get your head around that fact, and that you can produce the two and not muddle up certain things within the two diagrams. So here's where you get to practice the types of diagrams and have a look at them. The top link really gives you some good explanations and gives you some DFDs and system flowcharts to look at, and then you can start to see the difference. And it's quite simplistic to begin with, and then goes into a bit more detail, and really that's the level you need to be able to work at. There's then a free downloadable tutorial where you can create DFDs from start to finish. That's really worth having a look at. It might get very complicated, but you know, hey ho, better to be challenged and stretched in this, and then when you actually look at your own and look at it quite simplistically, you'll understand the more simpler ones. You have to get used to the notation that's there, but the notation is not vital. I don't think you're ever going to be marked down on the fact that you didn't use the correct shape on a particular diagram. It's just having consistency with the shapes. But you'll see that especially in the first link, they give you particular shapes that they use, and it's worth just keeping with those shapes. There's no point in trying to change the world with this. I mean, there are different notations used by different organisations, but let's just stick with the basics. The most important part is that you get your head round practicing and you have a go at these things and understand the difference between a DFD and a system flowchart, and can read and produce them.